Hello, my friends. I'm Rick, and this is your seat at the table, and you're looking at the PDF of Field Manual 3085. And obviously, this is the last one that I did in this manner, where I took a binder and some page protectors or whatever you want to call them, and stuck it in. It was I was in the process of doing this one, and I thought, Jesus, I got to figure out. There's got to be a way to bind them up better, which is when I went and bought that machine that punches holes and lets you put the little plastic binders on the sides of it in order to hold them together, which is kind of the preferred way of going about it. And on a personal note, I want to thank everybody who's joined and subscribed to the channel. We hit 675. We're consistently holding at 675 at the moment. I've noticed that sometimes you'll get a subscriber, and then 24 hours later it'll drop off. So I don't know if that's a thing that's to do with the YouTube algorithms and so on and so forth. But we are closing in on 700 subscribers, which is it's awesome. I mean, my channel is almost tripled in size. Definitely doubled plus in the past year, mostly because of the Battletech fans, and I'm grateful for everybody that's subscribed and stuck in this long. I mean, it's it's nice to know I'm generating something that is of interest, even in my ham-fisted, half-assed manner of doing things. So this would be the after the Jihad, as best I understand. So, like I said, back in 2002, when FASA bellied up and things become very, very, very confusing, it was hard to tell what had happened to the Fourth Succession War and its conclusion, and suddenly we leapfrog forward into the Dark Age, where we have this Republic of the Sphere, and we have all this other craziness going on, and it was so much, so fast, so soon, so confusing that I got terribly disillusioned with it. In addition to other life issues that got in the way, it caused me to back off and not really invest in the game, for almost 20 damn years. I did buy a few novels into the Dark Age, like 5 or 6 of them, or 7 of them, and with mixed results, because I was still confused as trying to figure out who these people were, what was going on, what had happened at the end of the FASA thing. And I get that's part of that changeover when you change companies. The fact that Catalyst has actually made quite an effort to go back and try to stitch together all the eras and to at least attempt to fill in some of the missing blanks. I mean, kudos for that effort. It's definitely well worth it. And so when we look at this field manual, we've found. I kind of wish I had read through it twice and did taken some more notes on it than I had some notes, but then one of the cats threw up on it. So I mean, and this, it is what it is. But the whole notepad was pretty much toast at that point. So what do you do, right? And so we talk about the dawn of the Jihad, the escalation, the conclusion of it, more or less, the rise of the Republic of the Sphere, the rise of Devlin Stone, and I still have questions and stuff. I'm looking at possibly doing another video on the 5 reasons the Republic of the Sphere was doomed from the start, beginning with being completely surrounded by enemies and potential enemies, and the given nature of the convoluted politics and aggressive negotiations of the inner sphere. It was just inevitable that it would fall apart, and then one or more would just gang up on them. And then there was hubris, right? Hubris is always the thing. And this guy here, this Devlin Stone, I am still trying to get my hands around this character, because there's so much of his early stuff I don't know, and I haven't read yet, or haven't really gotten a chance to get into, except for on a superficial manner. Because where did he come from? Who the hell is he? How did he get as skilled as he did? I understand that he's just a nobody that came suddenly out of left field and at a critical time, and that can happen in history. It does happen, and has happened, where somebody who just would have lived a normal whatever life, suddenly steps up and finds himself in a position that shakes the very foundations of the power structure. It is what it is. I mean, so I'm still trying to figure out what's going on there. And so we see the construction of the Republic of the Sphere. The compelling Confederation is still on an upswing. It's still building on the successes of Sun Tzu and his quest to repair and enhance the Confederation after all it had suffered during in the years directly before and after the Fourth Succession War and up through the era of FedCom Civil War. I mean, as much as I wanted to rail on his mother Romano being a nut, sister Kali is far bigger nut, but Romano also did quite a bit to help. You just have to acknowledge that she did quite a bit to help stabilize the Confederation after her father basically lost his faculties, and they'd lost about a third of the or better of the Confederation in one form or another. So the fact that they build up on it and were able to take advantage of certain things, it's not terribly surprising. That's one of the things that have made the Compellents such a worthy house, is the fact that they not only can roll with the punches and give back almost as good as they get, but they're very quick to reconstitute themselves and pull themselves up with their bootstraps. We talk about the Draconis Combine, and there was quite a bit of changeover. Unlike the Free Worlds League, which literally disintegrated, it sounds like the Kurita family disintegrated or was shot and had a number of situations come up and were replaced. And of course, there was internal dissent, internal issues, and politics. The thing about the Combine is that that's always going to be there. There's always underlying currents of I know better than you, how things should be, groups of people. We see that in the modern world today too, and so the fact that there was a massive transition is not surprising. That they're still a pretty potent house, and they're pretty much a solid house is not surprising. That's true. That is pretty much goes hand in hand with the Combine. Even though they lost, from the Fourth Succession War, they lost a chunk of their territory to the Ragazhal Republic, and to later to some of the clans, and then even later to the Republic of the Sphere. So the Inner Sphere, not totally surprising. It's nice to see that they're still in it to win it, and once again, I think that we're talking hubris again. There's something to be said about knowing when to quit, and sometimes the Combine doesn't know this. There are leadership within the Combine who keeps pushing and keeps pushing, and then suddenly they achieve far more than they really expected to achieve, and they're not sure what to do with it, and they're too stubborn to let go of it. And that's where we get to that dragon's tongue. I'll say this again, Tornaga should have, once he conquered the New Avalon, he should have just burned it to the ground and went home. Trying to hold on to it, he held on to it for 6 years? Kudos to him, but at the end of the day, anybody who's a basic understanding of tactics on the strategic level knows that the Combine had overextended himself in a very bad way, and their logistic chain was very long and convoluted, and there was a lot of space between the quote tongue and the house proper. And they should have focused more on filling in the blanks as opposed to just trying to hold on to that jewel of the Federation. I mean, geez, he'd already earned his place in the history books numerous times over. And Tornaga could have backed up, but that's just not that's not about the samurai way. That's not the Kurita way. I mean, it's just sometimes they overextend and sometimes they get their butts handed to them, right? And it's nice to see that these houses are not suffering as much from the Word of Blake Jihad as they might have. The Compellents and the Combine came out of the Jihad in much better shape than the rest of them did. The Federated Sons was a hot mess then, and the fact it became an even hotter mess in the Dark Age is not surprising. So at the end of, or the conclusion of the Jihad, they're still struggling to deal with some of their issues and to recover from this conclusion of the FedCom Civil War, as well as the Jihad. It's just my opinion on that. But the weaknesses are here, and it's pretty logical to understand what came next. So by having had a big chunk of the AFFS destroyed, both in the Jihad and then during the Dark Age because of Tornago, the fact that the Free Worlds League was put back on its back heels is kind of surprising in many ways. Not unforeseen, because traditionally that's how this thing goes. You know, you get to a big height and then you collapse in on yourself. This is another point of that the Republican Manosphere was doomed to from the beginning. It was never going to go the distance, in part because it's kind of the same argument I have, or my same belief when I'm talking about looking at the Ilkan era. One of the things that it stymies growth and play inside the game itself. In the game world, from the game perspective, from the player's perspective, having a dominant force of any sort. This is why the Star League was doomed to fail. So the second Star League, and I'll quote Elric's would-be third Star League, is not going to go the distance. It might, in literary terms, might cover some distance, but a few generations, but eventually it's not going to survive, because the contentious nature of the houses, the distinct cultural differences between the houses and the clans, just don't work well together. They just don't play well together, and it's just not going to. And in a way, that's kind of what we want and what we expect. So it's not totally a surprise. There was some interesting bits and pieces, a few eye openers, and a couple. Okay, now that sort of stuff makes sense. One of the downsides to this field manual, of course, in my personal opinion, is it has a lot of information on some of the house units, but not all of them. And once again, it lacks little pertinent details as to just exactly what the hell this unit is, how big is it, what is it consisted of. Some of the earlier versions were just better put together, in my opinion, but that's just me, and that's how my preferences and style are when it comes to this sort of thing. So when you look at reading the field manual, you're mostly looking at an overview of key units or cherry-picked units of a given faction, and there's a little bit of information on what's going on and politics and things like that, but it's not overwhelming. I mean, there are other source books that do a better job of covering that, and I get that too. One of the things that I come out of this still is I'm still looking at this totally sundered Free Worlds League and how much of a disintegration had taken place, and it was already in the offing toward the end of at the end of the FedCom Civil War, into the middle of it, through the Clan era. The Free World League were on top. They were the dominant house politically or militarily and resources wise, because they hadn't been strained by conflict with the clans on a personal level. They also hadn't been invaded on a large scale and cut in half by their neighbor, and they'd actually. The American charge, Thomas, actually seemed to have an agenda, a goal that was slightly different from anything that had come before him. And then we find out why, which was always suspected there was something shady going on when we were dealing with the Word of Blake, that maybe there was. I figured he was just indoctrinated, to find out that he was a doppelganger. In effect, he was a plant. Is also not 100% surprising, but the way it played out, yeah, it kind of makes some sense. And if you know anything about the history of the Free Worlds League, the history of the Free Worlds League has always been they're their own worst enemies. And if you take away serious external threats, it's just inevitable before the internal threats become such a problem that they explode. And this is the major example of this, that it actually wasn't one outside force, but a whole slew of different smaller factors, and then internal issues as well, and which led to the breakup and to the next 20 years, 30 years of conflict within between the former member states. And we're starting to see, in this case, the Hallis family bringing the Free Worlds League back together piece by piece. There's a map somewhere. I don't think it's in this one. I saw it in one of the other books I printed out last week. It shows just how broken up the Free Worlds League is on the large scale. What amazed me, or I found interesting in the map, is we all know the key minor players, the Regulans, the Andorians, the Rim Commodity, these, that, the other thing, the Merrics themselves. But for these minor houses, there are hundreds of independent worlds or independent seeming worlds that were either cut off, have bailed out, and or been abandoned by the powers that be, and are up for grabs. And this is where we get tons and tons of petty warlords and would-be dictators and rulers and this, that, and the other thing, which is just bucket loads of tabletop play for the players, for the fan base. But it still makes me, I look at that and I go, geez, I thought from all the books I have prior to the breakup of the Free Worlds League, that there were far more, there was like 20, 30 of these smaller nation states or these smaller houses within the Free Worlds League. Where did they all go? I mean, the map does a bad job. I mean, if they're still there, they're still there. But the maps I've seen so far to date really do a bad job of showing the true dissolution of the larger state into many smaller components. It's missing most of its smaller components. Keep that in mind, because that, I believe, is part of the pathway towards the Free Worlds League being restored to its majority. And it's in the process of doing that, correct. But if you have 60 to 70% of your would-be planetary systems controlled individually, or such a small minor house or leadership, much easier to be absorbed and much more likely for them to be drawn into the orbits of. So we may yet see the Free Worlds League reconstituted in its majority, although personally, and I've said this in other videos before too, and down the road, I don't know exactly when I'll get to it, but I do want to do a video on the Andorians in particular. The Duchy of Andorian has been such a pain in the ass for the Free Worlds League and everybody else since its existence, that we talk about bush wars and rebellions and constant political BS. That's a poster that this house is a poster child for, and I think the Free Worlds League would be well within its rights to give them the finger, flip them the bird, because at some point the Andorians' luck or fortune is going to reverse, and they're going to get rolled over. They're going to get tore up and destroyed, or have badly hammered by the compelled Confederation and the Magistry at Canopus, and or the Magistry at Canopus, or yet a third party somewhere. I don't see the Duchy of Andorian going the distance in any significant way independently. Now, I could be wrong. And that's a possibility that they do pull a rabbit out of their butt and manage to survive in the new world that's the inner sphere of the current politics, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where you just have to look at it and go, blah. So, one of the things I did get was a little bit of better information on what was going on in the individual power blocks, or these minor houses of the former league, or the Sundered League, however you look at it. Yet there's still a lot of missing information and details, and there's such a rich and wide range of these minor houses that it's a good possibility that I'll never get a full solid answer because it was never created. So one of the big shocks for me, of course, was during the Jihad era and into the current era, through the Dark Ages and into the Ilkhan era. It's just how badly the Lyran Commonwealth fared. It was almost as if to say that once that Katrina Steiner was removed from the game or politics, that the entire House Steiner was screwed, and it sure seemed to follow that suit. Now, it did not go the Free Worlds League, where it literally broke up into many individual components that constantly went to war with each other. They did balkanize, so we saw power blocks within the Commonwealth become dominant. They worked together loosely when necessary, but didn't intentionally go after each other. They were more focused on external historical enemies and things like that, which is probably one of the things that prevented the Commonwealth from completely falling apart like the League did. The fact that the Commonwealth which was been the powerhouse of the inner sphere for hundreds and hundreds of years, took a major hit. And it doesn't hard to see how or why. When you see the balkanization, there's no longer reason to support each other financially unless necessary. There's also the during the Jihad era, I now know that all three of the major mech production centers at one time or another were assaulted and occupied by the Word of Blake, which denied those resources and the material and the revenue from those critical industrial worlds to the Commonwealth, to the Steiners specifically. And now that that's been rectified, it's going to take time for this to build up again and to fix things. So, I mean, I'm still trying to put my fingers around exactly what the hell went down in the Commonwealth, and put them back on, not only to put them on their back foot, but literally knock them on their butt in such a way as and yet not. It's just I've struggled to try to, like I said, to try to get an understanding exactly what the hell happened. And I know that's got to do with some novels or some other source books I'm getting to or haven't read yet or may never read, so we shall see. We get into the overview of the clans. The Wars of Reaving really kind of was convenient how a lot of things all seem to go in different directions about the same time. Like I said, the Jihad, geez, the Word of Blake just basically rises up and attacks everybody that they felt they needed to or wanted to. And meanwhile, that just encouraged those other groups and smaller factions and minor houses and stuff to just basically tear into each other. Typical Innersphere BS. I mean, it is what it is. The clans at home, for the most part, nobody cares. The game. I mean, people who are interested, there's always people asking questions. What's going on with the clans at home? Are we going to see them come forward again? To say that they'll never come forward is once again, that's a form of hubris. No, it's sitting on a shelf because there's no plans right now, because right now Catalyst has got a ton of plans and a whole lot of things on their plate. And so unless something critically interesting pops up to justify some kind of situation, or somebody independently comes up with a kick-ass story, novel-wise, that Catalyst, head yahoos look at and go, "Hey, this is something that would be interesting," and then putting that into print, it's just kind of like why they don't do a whole lot of periphery stuff, because the fact is that they got enough stuff to deal with right now. They got to deal with the Kickstarter and the mercenary stuff, and then of course we're in the Ill Clan. We're in the not I want to say the earliest stages of the Ill Clan, but we are moving forward, and they want to get through that era to get on to whatever their planned next era is going to be. And no plan survives the enemy. That's the thing to keep in mind. They all have a working outline or an idea where they want things to go, but things have a tendency to alter and change that plan. So sometimes even the creators and the designers and the plotters and planners themselves can't be 100% sure how things are going to go, and we are all along for the ride, just like they are. So we get the state of radius for the various inner sphere clans, the ones that impact the most, and what's going on. Of course, nothing of earth-shattering, nothing too crazy. They got some beat up. It's kind of interesting that the Wobbies did. Wobbies were at least savvy enough to not actively go after the clans like they did the houses of the inner sphere at the same time. They did do some stuff, that's obvious. They did make some attacks, they did anger some people, and it did motivate a couple of the clans to get off their laurels and to go after them in junction with the, the inner sphere. So when I look at the map, so I'm looking at, here's the map of the Free Worlds League, and as you can see, the major minor houses, the major factions are listed. But look at all these independent systems. Just, you can see it. Now, when the Free Worlds League was the Free Worlds League before it became what we are looking at now, these weren't all independent individual worlds and systems. No, most of these all belong to minor factions of some sort, minor houses for sure, and many of them were named. So we're missing quite a few that were in the house books that we don't see now, and they're not being covered. Which, once again, there's such a sure number of them that it's not practical, but it sure makes me. This is the point I'm getting at. It's all this in between that the Hallis Merrics or whatever the hell, whoever the hell they are, want to try to really reinforce and to restore the Free Worlds League. It's these that they need to go. Yeah, get the big guys if they can, but for love of Pete, they definitely want to make sure they suck all these others, because if nothing else, it isolates the minor houses that are in contention, and it makes it much easier for them to overcome them piecemeal. Which is the same reason when I talk about the Duchy of Andria. The Duchy of Andria borders a significant portion of the Confederation that, in theory, you could isolate it. You know, it would be nice if they could be surrounded and cut off and marginalized, but that's not going to happen. But it also puts them in a serious risk of being absorbed by the Confederation, and they always have been. And that's something the Humphrey family tends to forget every now and then in their hubris. And I like that word because it applies so often to what goes on, the machinisms and things that we see, the Machiavellian politics and inter-house rivalries and internal rivalries amongst the members of the houses, that it's just well worth keeping that in mind. That the duchy is walking on thin ice, and even if it doesn't think it is. So, so is so on and so forth. And of course, we get to the section on the periphery, and the real shakers, as you guys know, is the Turians. The Turians are having a bad decade, probably a bad century. They've lost a considerable portion of their members to the Cauldron Protectorate, or whatever the hell it's called, and they're having internal derisions. The Canopans, the Magistracy of Canopus is actually still on an upswing. They're highly benefiting from their treaties and their collusion with the Confederation, but they also are walking on thin ice. We're talking the Confederation here. At some point, the Magistracy ceases to become valuable, or the Confederation decides that it's time to just acquire them, then we'll see a big conflict there. The real upswing in the Marians. The Marians are really pushing to become a major periphery power. And if it weren't for some of the setbacks that they've suffered, the possibilities are still there that we could see them expand. We also seen the birth of a couple more minor periphery powers like the Franc regions and the Filvet Coalition. It just shows that while Catalyst is not focused on the periphery is not being ignored, because Catalyst, the people of Catalyst, are first and foremost fans of Battletech themselves. They have been in the fan base since the beginning, and it's worth pointing that out, that they are. If you have any knowledge of the recent brouhaha with Wizards of the Coast and their missteps, I mean, people at Wizards of the Coast, as a corporation, as a company, too many people at the top are not gamers. They don't sit down at the table and play. And if anything, they're video gamers, and they're from the video game industry mostly. And then, once again, they themselves are not gamers first. That means that they don't have that internal knowledge and appreciation for everything that came before. So when they're in their drive to push for this one D&D, this virtual tabletop that's supposedly going to be the end all, the beat all, to replace the entire game, game philosophy, and do away with so much of the pen and paper material, that because they're viewing it as a video game, and they're failing to understand the nuances. More importantly, they really misunderstood the fan base, and their fan base loyal to the brick and mortar of the game world, of the material, and of the function. And by spitting on them and pissing on them, not a good idea. I know a lot of people, so we've seen that a little bit in FASA's history. So FASA had some problems with this back in the day, and when certain elements get involved, then it caused internal problems that led to other internal problems that got expanded into some kind of piss poor judgments. And maybe one of the worst has to be the way they allowed the creative control and the franchise license to be split into 3 different components. So that may actually have been a saving factor for Battletech 2, because now you have entities that are solely concentrated on the tabletop stuff. And most of the writers and creators that came up from the ranks, came up from the beginning, or have joined and grew up as children, as kids, playing and loving the world, the Battletech universe, and then joining and being very fortunate to be involved in the creation process of it, are heavily invested in that, to keep it that way. And this is why I sit there and I look at Catalyst, and I bring up this quite a few times. I'm not trying to idolize Catalyst by any means. It's a corporation. It's still a company. It still has corporate goons in charge sometimes. But the player fan base that within Catalyst is thick and deep, and heavily entrenched, and it matters. They care about how this stuff plays out. And so they have done a damn good job of trying to keep things in line with where things have been. The future will be similar to the past. There's a bit of a McDonald's theory to that. You always know wherever in the world you go, if you see a McDonald's, you can get the same comfort food that you're used to everywhere else in the world, kind of thing. There's some dangers to doing that as well, because they can become complacent and things can become boring and people will drift away. But we only have to look at that big, huge stumbling block that took place after FASA failed, and then FanPro and WizKids and then FanPro all got involved. Their sudden leap forward, their total choosing to ignore everything that came, or the bulk of the history. We'll just cut it off and leap forward, and hell with what happened, nobody cares, just kill everybody kind of approach, kind of burned them a lot. There's probably one of the key reasons nobody talks about why WizKids and FanPro are no longer in the business. Or for me to know. I'm sure there's plenty of y'all out there have better understanding than me on how that played out and what the factors were. But the fan base is crucial. And the fact that CGL is doing such a good job is in part why we're seeing this renaissance, this resurgence, this upswing in players. A lot of new players, yes. Just as importantly, quite a few older players like myself have come back to the table and are sitting down, and we've grabbed our chair at the table and are eagerly looking forward to what comes next, or grudgingly grumbling and crying, bitching and moaning and crying about what came next or what has been in the recent part, because we're still married to the original older stuff. But the fact of it is, we're at least open-minded enough, or hopeful enough, or tolerant enough to give Catalyst their due, and the fact that they have done such a good job of trying to stitch things together. And I'm not going to totally dump on FanPro. I don't know what WizKids have really brought to the table. I don't really see a whole lot of influence from WizKids on the large scale, other than being a bigger problem than they were a solution. FanPro did what they could do. I have noticed some patterns that some of y'all pointed out too. That quite a bit of the material that they published, it was just retreaded I mean, I made a comment about that in a video I did the other day. You'll hear it sooner or later when I printed out yet another revised version of the mercenary handbook or the mercenary field manual, and I'm looking at the material and I'm thinking, Jesus, it's 80% of what's here, 90% of what's here is the same units, the same stuff that's in the other 5 books. Now, I can understand when you're updating things from one era to the next. Each era introduces a new opportunity to reapproach all the core books. This is why we see the field manuals and the damn it. You know what I'm talking about. So every generation things change and we upgrade things and change things and bring the story along. And this is what keeps the company up and running. It actually helps us because it keeps the world going, keeps the lore building, it keeps the connectivity to the older material. At the same time, it opens windows and doors for things that were either shelved or not explored, and sometimes it forces things to be shelved and not explored. So factions come, factions die, but that's based on the era. So at the end of the day, no faction truly dies. No faction truly dies. They just are constrained to a given era. And that doesn't mean that up the road there's a possibility for some resurgence thereof. But what that will be, who knows? It could be 10 years from now, because right now, once again, like I said, from what I've read, what I've seen, this Kickstarter has really been a blessing in many ways, because it's opened my eyes to a bunch of videos and interviews and things that the Catalyst people themselves have been doing as part of the keeping the interest for the Kickstarter going. Really gives me a window into what's going on. See, now I'm at a disadvantage in some ways because I don't do the Discord thing. I have had Discord in the past, but Discord is it likes to dominate my goddamn computer. It just wants to, just the minute I turn my computer on, it wants to be right in my face. And I've never been able to get it to not do that. It just cheeses me off. And I won't have a program that just throws itself up automatically like it owns my computer. I'm just not going to do it. And then there's so much stuff that goes on in Discord that has no bearing on anything I'm interested in. So a handful of things I am interested in, it's not worth the aggravation of trying to manhandle the program. It's just like my security software. I hate it. I really do. I don't know why I let myself get suckered into a second year of it. The stupid Norton, it's a Norton program, and I had McAfee for years, and McAfee got to be too damn expensive. When they broke $100, I'm like, you're insane. I can't afford $100 a year just for one laptop's worth of production. Just because you run all kinds of deals if you're new, but if you're let's just grind the established group of people because we got them. So Norton is cheaper, yes, and it's not as effective from what I understand, yes. But more importantly, it's intrusive, very intrusive, which is what I don't like. It's constantly throwing up things at me, asking me if I want to do this, or just telling me it's doing that, or it's just like I got better. I don't want you in my way. Do your job in the background. It's what you're getting paid for, and not cause me to have to keep screwing with stuff. That's what happened with the Discord thing. So I miss out on things for Discord. I understand that a lot of conversations, a lot of stuff for Battletech takes place on the Discord server. Or servers. So, I mean, that's just my personal thing. I may eventually someday try going back to dealing with Discord again, and may not. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, geez. I'm still trying to. This laptop's over 2 years old now, and it's starting to develop some quirks. And like I said before, I want to replace it. I was working at trying to put some money back, and I put money into the damn Kickstarter, so there went half of my laptop. And now my wife's got to have a surgery on her knee in May, and we need $400 to cover her co-payments that came out of nowhere. So it's been we're scrambling, and we need that by the 1st. Or actually, we need it by the 25th because her surgery's on the 1st, and we need to have it prepaid or they won't do the surgery. They'll want to reschedule it. I just want her to get her damn surgery done. It's going to take her 4 to 6 months to recover from it anyway. She's got a torn meniscus and a broken A1C. She broke that a long time ago, and the pain's getting to be too much for her. So, I mean, I wanted to deal with it years ago, but she didn't want to deal with it. So here we are. right? And so there goes the rest of my damn savings, and I'm going to borrow money from my boss to help so we can get it paid. It's just not that, never mind. This is my life problems, my real world stuff. So when I look at the periphery and the changes and the upswings and some things that are not changed, so truth is there's no element of the near periphery that surrounds the inner sphere that has not had major impact since the clan arrival. In the decades since, they've undergone major changes, different types and different sorts. We see all of them in some ways improve. A few of them got obliterated or really put back on the heels. But like the inner sphere, it's on a scale. It'll come back around. The Tarns will resurge and become dominant, or will get their ducks in a row and get their act together. And the Canopans may find themselves on the back end of a compelling plot, and obviously the Outworlds Alliance, for all intents and purposes, is the Raven Alliance now. It is what it is, right? And I have no issue with that. I mean, I think it was pretty slick. I thought it was understandable. And the Marians, I'd like to see the Marians do better. I would like to see them grow. I would like to see them become a bigger faction than they are. And the fact that they haven't been obliterated, despite some of their own stupidity, it wasn't so. I think that invasion of the inner sphere, or the Federated, the Free Worlds League, was not a good idea. They misjudged the withdrawal and capabilities of their foe. They just assumed that it was a hot mess over there and they could just do what they wanted. And they learned the hard way that's not going to be true. So lots of possibilities still in the periphery to go. And the truth is, I'd like to see even more factions develop. The periphery's a big place. Obviously, it's endless as far as we're concerned. There could be an outer periphery that starts to form beyond the near periphery, where we see smaller states benefiting from the growth of the peripheries, the larger periphery states. Such as it is. And we get into the section on mercenaries, and this is really just an overshoot of a lot of other. There's so many source books on mercenaries that most of this material was covered in one version or another, and the fact that through all the eras, there's always demands for mercenaries. We talk about mercenaries today versus the various factions and things like this. Awesome stuff. And we get to the main meat of this damn field manual will be the Republic of the Sphere, because this is my first introduction to the Republic of the Inner Sphere as an entity post-Jihad. And so I would say that this is the era of the Dark Age era. So if they're two different things, the Jihad has come to a conclusion and the Dark Age is in play, and this is where they're still feeling, most of the factions are still feeling the effects of the Jihad and the World Black Machinisms, but they're also feeling the effects of the creation and the growth of the Republic of the Sphere. Because the Republic of the Sphere didn't exist if it didn't take a chunk out of everybody, all the major houses. Things that the major houses not keen on. They didn't fight 4 succession wars and numerous other bush wars just to have some upstart come out of nowhere and decide we're just going to set up shop. And that's one of the reasons that it wasn't going to fly. That's like I said, the Republic of the Inner Sphere was doomed to fail. And so it's not a surprise to see that it did. And the truth is, I know that the writers at the time were trying to be a little different. They wanted this faction to have something unique, wanted to be set it apart from the others, to make it kind of, I don't know, as necessarily as better, but different. I find it hard to read. I mean, their choice of terminology is okay. I'm a sci-fi guy, and I'm quite accepted. I'm quite willing to work with a lot of questionable I mean, my own writing, I acknowledge that my novels are based on primarily based off of a house within my would-be game, and that's dominated by an avian human genetic race of people, and so there's a lot of bird references in it. That was not generally my choice. It was the guy that created the house, and we built the novels came out of writing stories for his campaigns and his house creation and his house development. And then years later, after him and I parted ways, then I really missed that interaction. So I started writing some short stories that became much bigger stories, because my short stories always end up having no end to them, because I don't know. It's just is what it is. So it's just kind of the nature of it. But there's some kind of highfalutin arrogance. It was like the false Thomas Merrick and his attempt to put chivalry and whatever into the Free Worlds League. So it was introduction of the knights of the knights, his knights units, for example, the first knights and second knights. The when I first heard some of the references to the Republic of the Inner Sphere, I was thinking, gee, there's an awful lot of paladins and knights and literal knights and all this stuff. So there's a lot of parallels to what the false Merrick was trying to do. You want to talk about possible conspiracy stuff? I mean, what's the possibility that, and it's never been exactly stated that Stone didn't come from Comstar. It's implied. There's some implications that he has connections or had connections with Comstar at some point. I don't know, right? So I found it to be a little bit difficult to ingest, and that's partly because maybe I don't. It's not a faction I'm really a fan of. I haven't had a whole lot of experience with it. I haven't had any gameplay where I've sat at a table and played with it or engaged with it. So, I mean, I just thought it seems to be so full of itself. If anything else, it's a dialed down version of the Star League. This is what the Star League might have been, kind of thing, which, that's fine. But there's a lot of information in here, a lot of good stuff to know if you really want to know what's going on. But there's still a lot of missing holes or blind spots or stuff that I just don't get. And that's partly on me, And so, anyway, this is the one that I know that down the road, a few more years down the road, when I will probably go back. I will go back at some point and reread this. I might even pull it all out of the damn folder and actually bind it up. But it sure is one thick deuce when it's set up like this. Currently, I've been reading, where the hell are you? There we go. The Talking Head. I got this thing labeled as the Talking Head camera for obvious reasons. I've been reading Shattered Fortress. It's a PDF I got of Shattered Fortress. It's actually in my work truck. It was in the truck this was one of the two. This and Shattered Fortress was in the truck. About 3/4 of the way through that one. And I was, there was a TRO, I think, that I got, that I was reading through too. So trying to get better understanding of the Republic of the Sphere in general. So this is obviously at the gory days and when it's set up, how it got set up, why it got set up, kind of without going into great detail on it. And Shattered Fortress is the conclusion of it prior to the Ill Clan's invasion, or the Hour of the Wolf stuff. And so we can see how even before the clans got involved, just as my personal take, and thought about this. Wolves are scavengers. For all the talk about them being hunters and blah blah blah, truth is, wolves in the wild are actually more They will take advantage of things more than they will actively hunt shit. They're looking for things that they can get without putting a whole lot of effort in it when they can, which is typical of the nature. So, the Inner Sphere basically cut the knees out from underneath the Republic of the Sphere. You know, the Capellans and others beat the brakes off of them a couple times, in such a manner that they were forced to enact the wall to preserve the small portion of the inner portion of the Republic of the Sphere, while casting the rest of them literally to the wolves. This was just an invitation for the scavengers to come hunting, to come looking for that crack in the wall, kind of so to speak, and that Stone's dream dies in such an inglorious death. It's almost poetic, almost. You know, not so keen on how Alaric was the poet, but I can't fault Alaric either, because Alaric did, you know what, and y'all, a lot of people can call Alaric Mary Sue, and there's some, from the definition of what a lot of people throw around these days, there's some truth to that. But the thing here is that he finally did what all the Crusader clans set out to do when they first invaded. And he didn't screw. He finally realized that the only time, you know, if we don't do it, we're not going to ever do it. So let's just go do it. Let's just go take Terra. You know, perhaps if the clans hadn't been suckered into the Battle of TO&Es, things, you know, they might have very well had a Battle of Terra sooner than later, right? And actually, we've seen several battles for Terra, and I suspect we haven't seen the last one. You know, that's just my opinion on that sort of stuff. It be what it be. Going on, my friends, this is Rick, and hey, if you like the channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, tell your buddies, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell anybody else that's in the gaming industry or gaming fandom that says, hey, this is a